Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jazz and today I have my January wrap up. Ooh. If you've already seen my boyfriend picks my January reads video, then you'll already know all the books in this video, but I wanted to do a separate wrap up anyway so I could talk about them in a little bit more detail, because that was very much a reading vlog, finding out what I was reading as it went kind of thing. So I thought it would be nice to just settle down and have a chat about the books that I read in January. So I read a total of 6 books in January. Here are 5 of them, and then one of them I've already lent out to my friend, so I can't show you that. In terms of my book buying ban, I bought no books in January. Very exciting. Not exciting because I want to buy books, but very exciting that I'm sticking to my rule. And then in terms of the books that I read, 2 of them were from my backlist. It was like a more recent backlist, they're not like the super old ones, but nonetheless, 2 of them were from my backlist. 3 of them were Ben's books, and then 1 of them I had borrowed from a friend. So that is my distribution. I didn't use the library last month, but I'm gonna hopefully try and use it this month. So we'll see how that goes. You'll see that in my February wrap up. So I read a total of 6 books. I'm very proud of that. I usually manage maybe like 4 a month, just in terms of balancing full-time job and other things. That's my normal amount that I read. So 6, I'm very proud of. So let's get into what I actually read. Okay, so the first book that Ben picked for me to read was The Last by Hanna Jameson. I'd seen a lot about this book, from various different people, so I was very intrigued to read it. So if you don't know, the book is basically set at the point of the world being destroyed by nuclear war, basically. So it's quite apocalyptic, and it's about these people that are in a hotel when the nuclear war starts, and it's about them in this hotel. And it's set in Switzerland. So on the back it kind of promises... Oh. Hello. On the back it kind of promises apocalyptic fiction, but also there's a mystery element and thriller element. It says the race is on to find the killer before the killer finds you. Very dramatic. Overall I rated this book 3 stars. I thought it was I liked the way it was set. It was set in diary entries of day 50, kind of after the day of the nuclear war starting. So I really enjoyed that element, and that meant some of the chapters were super quick, some of them were quite longer, but I like that kind of variety. I thought it started off strong. I was intrigued, I was engaged, I was like, yikes, nuclear war, doesn't feel that far off our current climate, TBH. And it just kind of went downhill for me. I didn't care about the main character. I think that was kind of the point, but it was frustratingly not a relatable character. He was the most middle-aged white man I've ever read. The story got very much wrapped up in this mystery, but it kind of never really amounted to anything, so I ended up not caring a lot about that. I also found the end really disappointing. Obviously won't go into detail about that, but you know when it goes one way and then it just takes you another way and you're like, why would I care about that? So disappointing. Also, it kind of plays off a lot of stereotypes. There's one character called Tomi, and she's portrayed as the badass feminist stereotype, and she is just... she just doesn't feel like a 3-dimensional character. And then there's a Japanese woman in the book and she's portrayed as small and quiet, and that annoyed me. And then obviously the main guy is just portrayed as very much a middle-aged white man. I don't know. Overall I'm I'm not pushing this in my friends' faces to read it, if you know what I mean. It was cool, I like an apocalyptic story, but I wanted more. On to book number 2. So the second book I read in January was Kuramas Memoir, My Story of Embracing Purpose, Healing and Hope. Karamo, if you don't know, is in the cast of Queer Eye, which is excellent. If you haven't heard of it, you should obviously go and watch it. And here's the culture expert in Queer Eye. I read Tan France's memoir last year and I really enjoyed it, and so I'm kind of slowly making my way through all of their memoirs, just one by one. Jonathan Van Ness is next. Yeah, so Ben picked this for me to read and I really liked it. I think I gave it 4 stars, even though it's kind of weird to rate a memoir because it's you're rating their life. It's kind of odd. But it was really interesting to hear his story as he talks about his history of abuse as an abuser, which is was really honestly told and obviously very uncomfortable to read, and it's obviously all in reflection, and yeah, I found that really interesting to read about. I think it's a really good read to kind of remind yourself to be more honest and like open with yourself. And the thing about my story of embracing purpose, healing and hope is like so true. It very much like a reflection memoir. Not like to compare, but it's really interesting to see the differences in like Tan's, the way Tan got onto Queer Eye and then the way Karamo got onto Queer Eye, whereas Tan was very much like, I'll just apply because it's fun and I want friends, whereas Karamo was like his dream. So yeah, that was really interesting. Yeah, a really solid read, and if you like Queer Eye, I would definitely recommend it. On to book number 3. So the next book Ben picked for me to read was Queer There and Everywhere, 23 People Who Changed the World by Sarah Prager. I read so much, just as a side note, I read so much non-fiction this month, which is kind of good because I always put off non-fiction, but because Ben was choosing what I read, he was just like, on to the next non-fiction. But yeah, this book, firstly, this cover is just beautiful. I loved this book. I thought it was really, really well done. I learned so much, and like as we go, it starts off quite older and then it gets a bit more modern. I found it really fascinating to learn about like the hidden queer people of history, people that you haven't really heard of before. There's obviously some people that you have heard of, but yeah, I found it super fascinating reading and just absorbing queer history. I feel sometimes it can really get thrown around that like being queer is modern, and like that is one, just so ridiculous, but also this kind of very much shows that it's like, no, it just feels modern because you talk about it more, whereas before everyone had to hide it. Like that doesn't mean it didn't exist, obviously. And so this is a really good book to read to kind of show you those hidden stories unfortunately had to be hidden. Yeah, super fascinating, really engagingly. Didn't feel like I was reading a non-fiction because it's really chatty and like casual style, so, and each story kind of feels like you're reading a little short story. So yeah, if you're intimidated by non-fiction, I would definitely recommend you give this one a go. What I will say that I was slightly disappointed with is that it's more focused on like the Western world, queer history in the Western world, but the author does address that and says that there's such a lack of records of queer history outside of the Western world, which is why that it more focuses on the Western world. Yeah, but overall, definitely a good, solid yes to this. Okay, on to book number 4. So the next book Ben picked for me was Openly Straight by Bill Konigsberg. When Ben read these, he actually read Honestly Ben, which is the second book in the duology, first. I'm assuming, I feel he picked it up because it had Ben in the title and he's called Ben. It's just like my theory. And so then he read this one after the second one, and so he picked this, well, he obviously really enjoyed it, but also because he thought I should try and read it in the correct order and then see what I think of it when it's told in the way that it actually should be told. Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. So Openly Straight is about a boy called Rafe, and he moves schools. He goes from like a public school into a boarding school. So when we start the book, he's out, he's gay, and he's perfectly happy with this. However, as he moves schools, you kind of realise he's not. He hates being put into boxes from other people because he's gay, people not talking to him about certain things because he's gay, and like it really delves really well into labels. I think that is something this book does excellently. So Rafe basically moves to a boarding school and he goes back into the closet to try and get rid of the label of like, he just wants to fit in basically. I think it was just really engaging. It was really easy to read. I think there were certain parts that felt a little bit dated. When was this written? Was it 2013? Yeah, it was 2013. And there are some like words that are used and I'm like, that has not held up in time, which made me a bit uncomfortable. It didn't like make the book bad, but I was just like, oh yikes, that's not okay. I also think in terms of diving into labels, it did it really well in terms of like identity labels and like your sexual preference labels and like that sort of thing. However, I think it could have like dove, oh my god, words, into like, I don't know, societal labels a bit more. Like, so when he goes to the boarding school, he kind of gets in with the like jock crowd. There's this one jock and like he's kind of portrayed as a bit of a dick, and he is basically a dick in the whole way through the book. And then at the end, I can't remember what the quote was, but it was kind of like, yeah, because he's a jock, that's why this is happening, sort of thing. That's not a good like take, that's not what actually was said, but it was kind of that vibe of like, it would have been really interesting to him to dive a bit more into like, obviously not all jocks are dicks. And no, obviously that it's not, because one of the main other characters, Ben, is part of the like the jock group, but not really. I don't know, I think it could have just a little bit more, that would have been quite interesting, because it was already talking so much more about labels and it felt like that was kind of missing. Overall though, I really liked this one. I would definitely recommend it. It's a really nice queer story that just talks about labels really well. On to the next book. So the next book I don't have with me, I've lent it out to my friend Ella, but it is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This was such a weirdly interesting read. I'd heard a lot of people talking about it on Instagram, and it had caught my eye because the cover is so bright, as you can see. And so I found it in a charity shop and I was like, yes, please, that's mine. It's only like 160 pages. I read it in a day. It was an experience. It is a translation and it is set in Japan. So it focuses around this woman called Keiko, and she is kind of thinks of herself as weird and not normal. There's like a few moments at the beginning of the book where you can see that, like as she reflects on moments that happened in her childhood that were like really disturbing. And it's kind of like a lack of emotion and lack of empathy of other people. I'm not explaining that very well. But where other people are saying, that is really not okay, and she cannot understand why it's not okay. As we move into adulthood, she becomes a convenience store worker, and it kind of has such an atmosphere of Japanese convenience stores, and the way that sort of work as a worker can like absorb you into it. And especially with Keiko's mindset, she is fully thinks of herself as a convenience store woman, and that is it. That is her life. That is all that she is. And it was just so fascinating. It was so weird, but also so absorbed. Like, I was absorbed into the story and was like, I care so much about whether these chicken skewers are ready for the lunchtime rush. It was so bizarre. And it kind of reminded me of my like waitress work days when I was working as a waitress, and like I actually wrote this in my Goodreads review, but I specifically remember like once waking up in like, you know, hot sweats because I'd forgotten to give table 10 their ketchup, and it was like that kind of thing, and it like sticks in your brain and it messes with you in weird specific ways, and I think this book does that fascinatingly and really well. It's interesting because a lot of people compare it to like the Japanese Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, and I think it's way better than Eleanor Oliphant. Eleanor Oliphant I think was fine, bit boring but fine, but it definitely has the same vibes as that. But I just found this book so much more fascinating, also maybe because it was way shorter, that's why. But yeah, it just really interesting, really like never read anything like this kind of book. I would definitely recommend checking it out if it kind of sounds like your sort of thing. It definitely wasn't 5 stars for me. I think it was more like a 4-star read, because there was one of the characters really annoyed me, and there didn't seem to be like a place for LGBTQ plus characters, and it was never really mentioned, and that's okay, but also I think I would have appreciated it if it had kind of been mentioned in a certain way. Some of the framing was just like, this is life, without thinking about anything else. But then also that's because we're in her head, and to her that is life, so it's like two ways, do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm unsure. But I really liked it. Weird. Would recommend. And so the final book I read in January, except I kind of finished it on February 1st, but you know, I was like 95% January, 5% February, so I'm counting it in January. And that is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. This one I borrowed from Amy, thank you Amy, and I've been meaning to read it for years and I had never got around to it, so I'm really glad that Ben picked this one for me. Oh, I don't even know where to start about this book. It is so brutally honest, does not pander to anything in the slightest. As a white person reading it, it's kind of, it's like hard to, it's like designed to make you uncomfortable, but that's like the whole point. Hello, Editing Jazz here. I just want to clarify, I just said it's like designed to make you uncomfortable, but that's like the whole point, which kind of sounds a bit bad then, that's not really what I mean. because obviously when she wrote the book, she wasn't writing it specifically just for white people to read it and then feel bad, which I just didn't word that properly. I hope you get my gist, that it would be weird as a white person if you read it and you're entirely like, yeah, sure, with everything that was said, because, like, again, that isn't the point of the book. I just wanted to clarify that. When you read it and you read about the horrible shit that's happened in the past, like learning all about the Black history in the UK, I had never known anything about the Black history in the UK. That's just not taught in schools. And so it's your own responsibility, and it is my responsibility to learn more about it. And it obviously makes you uncomfortable, but that's like not the point. Like, she doesn't care if you're uncomfortable. You have to be able to go out and talk about race, and it's so important to like call out little moments of racism are so important to be called out by anyone and everyone, and especially white people, because if you're sat there as little moments of racism happen, you're part of the problem. Like, you can be... I think this is what this book talks about really well, the kind of left liberal view of thinking they're progressive because they're not being racist, but by not actively fighting against it, you're part of the problem. And that highlighted that so well for me. Like, there was a specific moment in this book that I've like randomly stuck with me, and it talks about the Paris attacks, and it says about you know, people like sharing on Facebook about it happening, and then when that happened, like a few days later, people kind of showing that they cared about not just the Western world by sharing an attack that had happened in Kenya, but this attack happened 7 months ago. Like showing that you care and like being anti-racist as a performance is not helpful. And a really good point was made that like if you cared about that, you would have talked about it back in April when it had happened, not 7 months after it had happened, because an attack in a Western country has happened. You're then trying to show your friends that you also care about the Western world. That is so problematic, and it really highlighted that for me, and I'm so aware you shouldn't be anti-racist just so you can show your friends that you're like, look, I care about the Western, I care about other countries too, when that's not the point of that. Like, you should do it because it's right, not because people are showing you, people are like, you know, giving you a pat on the back. You don't need a fucking pat on the back. Yeah, really, really good. Would highly recommend. I gave this one 5 stars. Obs. And that is my wrap up. Yikes, that was a lot, but I read some really good books this month. Shout out to Ben for picking my books in January. That was a great way to start off the reading year on a high, and I read some really good books that I wouldn't have picked up, I don't think. So yeah, and that is my wrap up. What did you read in January? Have you read any of these books, and what did you think of them? Please let me know in the comments. And what was your favourite book that you read in January? And how many books did you read? Etc, etc, etc. Please come and have a chat with me and let me know. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And I will see you in a new video. Bye.